The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge Heights, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in the city. Judge Jimmy Patterson adjusted his rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his tired eyes. At 53, he'd spent nearly 2 decades on the federal bench, earning respect for his fairness and integrity. Today had been particularly grueling, 14 hours presiding over a complex securities fraud case. Jimmy smiled as he accelerated his brand-new Mercedes S-Class, the engine purring softly beneath the hood. The car had been delivered just 3 days ago, a reward he'd promised himself after years of practical vehicles. The sleek black exterior gleamed in the golden hour light, and the new car smell still lingered in the leather interior. Almost home, Jimmy muttered to himself, already imagining kicking off his formal shoes and enjoying a glass of his favorite whiskey on the back patio. His thoughts drifted to his wife Vanessa, who had texted earlier about having prepared his favorite meal for dinner. The wail of a police siren shattered his peaceful moment. Blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Jimmy frowned, checking his speedometer. He'd been driving 5 under the limit. With a sigh, he signaled and pulled to the curb, the tires of his new Mercedes crunching on the gravel shoulder. Following procedure, Jimmy turned off the engine, placed his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. In his rearview mirror, he observed a white officer emerging from the patrol car, adjusting his belt as he approached. Jimmy lowered his window. "License and registration," the officer demanded, without offering a greeting or explanation for the stop. "Good evening, officer," Jimmy replied calmly. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The officer, whose nameplate read Reynolds, stared hard at Jimmy, his expression unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses despite the fading daylight. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with a military-style haircut and rigid posture. "I said license and registration," Officer Reynolds repeated, his tone sharper. "This vehicle matches the description of one reported stolen earlier today." Jimmy nodded carefully. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my jacket pocket and then get the registration from the glove compartment. Is that all right?" The officer gave a terse nod. Jimmy moved deliberately, retrieving his license from his wallet and then leaning to open the glove compartment for the vehicle documents. He handed both to the officer. Officer Stephen Reynolds examined the license, looking between the photo and Jimmy's face multiple times. "This is your vehicle, Mr. Patterson?" "Yes, it is. I purchased it 3 days ago. The registration and proof of purchase are right there." Reynolds flipped through the papers, his frown deepening. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." "Officer Reynolds, is there a problem? The registration clearly shows." "I said step out of the vehicle." "Now." Reynolds' hand moved to rest on his holster. Jimmy took a deep breath, weighing his options. As a federal judge, he knew his rights intimately, but he also knew the reality of being a black man confronted by law enforcement. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped out. "Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the vehicle." "Officer, I'd like to understand the reason for this." "I provided proper documentation showing this is my car." Reynolds stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Listen, I don't know how you got your hands on these papers, but there's no way this vehicle belongs to you. This is a $100,000 car in a neighborhood where you clearly don't belong." The implication hit Jimmy like a physical blow. Despite his tailored suit, his position, his decades of service to the justice system, to this officer, he was simply a black man in an expensive car, automatically suspicious. "Officer Reynolds," Jimmy said, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "I live at 1742 Oak Ridge Drive, just 2 blocks from here. I am a federal judge. This vehicle is registered in my name because I purchased it legally. I would appreciate if you would verify the information I provided and allow me to continue home to my dinner." Reynolds scoffed. "A federal judge? Right. And I'm the Attorney General." He reached for his radio. "I'm calling for backup." "Don't move." Jimmy remained still, his hands now on the roof of his own car, as Reynolds stepped back and spoke into his radio. "Unit 34, requesting backup on Oak Ridge and Elm. Possible stolen vehicle, suspect being uncooperative." The officer's deliberate mischaracterization of the situation made Jimmy's blood boil, but years on the bench had taught him to control his outward reactions. He thought of the cases he presided over, including police misconduct suits. He thought of his children and what he taught them about encounters with law enforcement. Stay calm. Document everything. Live to fight another day. "Sir, are there any weapons in the vehicle?" Reynolds called, still maintaining his distance. "No," Jimmy answered. "Officer, you have my identification. You can easily verify who I am. This situation is completely unnecessary." Reynolds approached again, this time beginning to pat Jimmy down. The indignity of the moment wasn't lost on Jimmy, being frisked outside his own luxury car, just blocks from his home, for no legitimate reason. "Is there a problem here?" A deep voice called from across the street. An older white man with a golden retriever had stopped his evening walk to observe the scene. "Police business, sir." "Please move along," Reynolds responded sharply. The man hesitated. Jimmy Patterson. Is that you?" Jimmy recognized Richard Harmon, a retired judge who lived in the neighborhood. "Hello, Richard," he called, relief washing over him at seeing a familiar face. "What's going on here?" Richard asked, crossing the street with his dog. "Sir, I need you to step back," Reynolds warned. "I will not," Richard replied firmly. "This man is Federal Judge Jimmy Patterson. He's my colleague and neighbor. What possible reason could you have for detaining him?" Officer Reynolds faltered slightly but maintained his authoritative stance. "I'm investigating a reported stolen vehicle, sir. Please step back or I'll have to detain you for interfering with police business." Richard pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Chief Dawson right now. We play golf together every Saturday." He began dialing, his eyes never leaving Reynolds. Jimmy remained in position, hands on the roof of his car, but a small smile played at the corner of his mouth. The arrival of Richard had changed the dynamic, but it also highlighted the stark reality. His word alone hadn't been enough. "That won't be necessary," Reynolds said, his tone suddenly shifting. "I'm just doing my job, following protocol for a reported vehicle theft." "And which vehicle exactly matches the description?" Richard pressed. "Make, model, license plate?" Reynolds hesitated. "I received a general alert for a black luxury sedan." Richard snorted. "That's hardly specific. And you didn't even run the plates before detaining a federal judge?" "Chief Dawson will be very interested to hear about this." A second patrol car pulled up, lights flashing but sirens silent. A female officer emerged, Lieutenant Diana Cortez according to her nameplate. She approached with a questioning look. "What's the situation here, Reynolds?" she asked, surveying the scene. "Possible stolen vehicle, ma'am. I was just verifying ownership by handcuffing a man in a business suit outside his own car." Richard interjected. "This is Federal Judge Patterson, Diana." Recognition flashed across Lieutenant Cortez's face. "Judge Patterson. I'm so sorry for the confusion." She turned sharply to Reynolds. "Did you run the plates before initiating the stop?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "I was about to when I noticed." "When you noticed a black man driving an expensive car?" Jimmy finished for him, finally lowering his hands from the roof. "Lieutenant Cortez, I believe Officer Reynolds has predetermined that I couldn't possibly own this vehicle legitimately, despite providing proper documentation." Cortez's expression hardened as she turned to Reynolds. "We received no stolen vehicle reports matching this description today." "What exactly prompted this stop?" Reynolds' face flushed. "I observed the vehicle making an improper lane change earlier." "That's a new reason," Jimmy noted quietly. "You initially claimed the car matched a stolen vehicle description." Cortez looked between them, then made a decision. "Officer Reynolds, return the judge's documents immediately." "Judge Patterson, I apologize deeply for this incident. I assure you it will be thoroughly reviewed." Reynolds reluctantly handed back Jimmy's license and registration, avoiding eye contact. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Jimmy said, taking his documents. "I'll be following up on this incident formally." Officer Reynolds seems to have a creative imagination when it comes to establishing probable cause. As Jimmy prepared to return to his vehicle, a flash of recognition crossed his face as he looked more closely at Officer Reynolds. The realization hit him suddenly. He'd seen this man before in his courtroom. Not as an officer giving testimony, but sitting in the gallery during the sentencing of Thomas Reynolds, a man convicted of investment fraud 2 years ago. The officer's brother. Jimmy maintained his composure, but internally his mind raced. Was this a coincidence, or had Officer Reynolds recognized him from the beginning? Was this harassment random or targeted? As he slid back into the driver's seat of his Mercedes, Jimmy caught Reynolds' gaze in the side mirror. There was something there, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even satisfaction, that confirmed Jimmy's suspicion. This wasn't just racial profiling. This was personal. And as Judge Jimmy Patterson started his engine, He knew with absolute certainty that this incident was far from over. 2 days after the incident, Judge Jimmy Patterson sat in his chambers, fingers steepled as he reviewed the complaint he'd filed with the police department's Internal Affairs Division. The elegant wood-paneled room was quiet save for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the wall, a gift from his mentor when Jimmy had first been appointed to the bench. His administrative assistant, Darlene, knocked softly before entering. "Judge Patterson, your 3 o'clock is here." Jimmy nodded, smoothing his tie. "Thank you, Darlene. Send them in." The door opened to reveal Lieutenant Diana Cortez, her uniform pressed and perfect, accompanied by the department's Internal Affairs Director, Captain Howard Bennett. Jimmy stood to greet them, gesturing to the leather chairs positioned before his desk. "Thank you for coming," Jimmy said, his tone professional but cool. "I appreciate your prompt response to my complaint." Captain Bennett, a gray-haired veteran with thick glasses, cleared his throat. "Judge Patterson, we take allegations of misconduct very seriously, especially when they involve someone of your standing in the community." Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "Of my standing? Would you take them less seriously if I were simply a regular citizen?" Bennett shifted uncomfortably. "That's not what I meant, Your Honor. But that's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Jimmy opened a folder on his desk. "I've done some research since our encounter. Officer Stephen Reynolds has had 7 complaints filed against him in the past 18 months. 5 involved traffic stops of minorities driving luxury vehicles in predominantly white neighborhoods. All were dismissed due to insufficient evidence or officer discretion." Cortez leaned forward. "Judge Patterson, I pulled the body cam footage from the incident. Officer Reynolds failed to activate his camera at the beginning of the stop, another violation of policy." "Convenient," Jimmy remarked. "But your neighbor's phone captured video starting from when he approached," Cortez continued. "And the patrol car's dashboard camera was running. We have enough to establish a pattern of behavior." Jimmy studied them both. "This goes beyond a pattern of behavior. Officer Reynolds recognized me." "What do you mean?" Bennett asked. 2 years ago, I presided over the case of United States versus Thomas Reynolds. Investment fraud. 8-year sentence." Jimmy pulled a photograph from his folder, a courtroom sketch showing the defendant, Thomas Reynolds, with a younger officer Stephen Reynolds sitting directly behind him. "This is Officer Reynolds' brother." Bennett's face drained of color. "You believe the stop was targeted harassment? Retaliation?" "I'm not sure what I believe yet," Jimmy replied. "But it seems like quite a coincidence, doesn't it? And there's more." Jimmy slid another document across the desk. "I'm currently overseeing a class action discrimination lawsuit against your department. Henderson et al. V. Metro Police Department. Officer Reynolds would certainly be aware of this case. It's been in the news for months." The air in the room seemed to grow thicker as the implication settled over them. Bennett removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "This is problematic," he admitted. "Problematic doesn't begin to cover it," Jimmy responded. "Officer Reynolds pulled me over without cause, escalated a routine stop into a detention based on racial profiling, then lied about his reasoning, all while knowing exactly who I was and deliberately choosing not to run my plates beforehand, which would have immediately confirmed my identity and ownership of the vehicle." Cortez nodded grimly. "The dashboard camera shows him running your plates after he called for backup, not before the stop. He would have seen your name and address at that point, confirming you were who you said you were. And yet he continued with the detention," Jimmy noted. "Judge Patterson," Bennett said carefully, "what are you seeking here?" "Officer Reynolds is already on administrative leave pending our investigation." Jimmy leaned back in his chair. "Justice, Captain. The same thing I've dedicated my life to. I want a formal acknowledgement that Officer Reynolds engaged in racial profiling and targeted harassment. I want a review of all his previous stops and arrests. And I want substantive reforms to prevent this from happening to others who don't have the privilege of a title before their name." A knock at the door interrupted them. Darlene poked her head in again. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Judge, but there's something you need to see." She entered, tablet in hand, and placed it before Jimmy. A news website was open, the headline bold: "Federal Judge Files Discrimination Complaint Against Officer Who Detained Him." Below was dashcam footage of Jimmy standing with his hands on his car, next to a photo of him in his judicial robes. "It's gone viral, sir," Darlene said quietly. "Every major news outlet is picking it up." Jimmy scrolled through the article, his expression darkening. The story had every detail correct. including references to his role in the pending class action suit against the department. Bennett and Cortez exchanged alarmed glances. "This complicates things," Bennett muttered. "No," Jimmy countered. "This clarifies things. The public deserves transparency." He handed the tablet back to Darlene, then faced Bennett. "Your department now has a spotlight on it that won't dim any time soon. How you respond will define your legacy." As if on cue, Bennett's phone buzzed. He checked it and grimaced. "The chief wants an immediate briefing." "I imagine he does," Jimmy replied, rising from his chair. "Lieutenant Cortez, I'd like a moment alone with you if Captain Bennett can excuse us." Bennett nodded, clearly eager to address the escalating public relations crisis. He left quickly, already dialing on his phone. Once they were alone, Jimmy's formal demeanor softened slightly. "Diana, we've known each other for years. Since you testified in my courtroom on that drug trafficking case back when you were a detective." Cortez nodded. "You were fair. Tough but fair. I need your honesty now. Is Reynolds a symptom or the disease itself?" Cortez hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "Both. He's one of the worst, but he's not alone. There's a culture of impunity that protects officers like him. The good cops stay quiet to survive. Including you?" Jimmy asked, not unkindly. "I've tried to make changes from within," she said, a hint of defensiveness in her voice. "It's not easy. Few worthwhile things are," Jimmy replied. He reached for another folder on his desk. "I have something to show you. These are statistics from every traffic stop in this city for the past 5 years, broken down by race, neighborhood, and outcome. My law clerk analyzed them last night." Cortez took the folder, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages of charts and data. "Black drivers are 7 times more likely to be stopped in affluent neighborhoods than white drivers," Jimmy pointed out, "and 12 times more likely to have their vehicles searched, despite contraband being found more frequently in vehicles driven by white people. This would be damning evidence in your class action suit," Cortez said quietly. "Yes, it would," Jimmy agreed. "But more importantly, it's evidence of a systemic problem that needs addressing whether or not my personal incident ever occurred." Cortez closed the folder, meeting his gaze directly. "What do you want from me, specifically?" "The truth. When Internal Affairs investigates Reynolds, they'll find evidence of dozens of similar stops. Will you testify to what you've witnessed over the years? The patterns you've observed? The comments made behind closed doors?" The weight of his request hung heavy between them. Cortez's career, her pension, her relationships with fellow officers, all will be jeopardized if she spoke out. "I have 2 years until retirement," she said finally. "And how many more Stephen Reynolds will rise through the ranks in those 2 years?" Jimmy countered. "How many more citizens will be humiliated or worse?" Before she could answer, Jimmy's phone rang. He checked the display and frowned. "It's the chief judge of our district. I need to take this." Cortez stood to leave, but Jimmy waved for her to stay. He answered, putting the call on speaker. "James Patterson," he answered formally. "Jimmy, it's William. I've just seen the news." Chief Judge William Hargrove's deep voice filled the room. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, William. Nothing injured but my dignity. The administrative office of the courts is getting calls from reporters. This is becoming a significant story." Jimmy sighed. "I suspected it might." "There's another matter," Hargrove continued, his tone becoming more formal. "The Henderson class action. Given your recent personal experience, there may be questions about your impartiality." Jimmy felt a flash of anger. "Are you suggesting I recuse myself?" "I'm suggesting you consider it carefully. The appearance of bias could undermine whatever ruling you eventually make." The irony wasn't lost on Jimmy. His own victimization might cost him the opportunity to address the very system that had victimized him. "I'll take it under advisement," he replied stiffly. "Do that. And Jimmy, be careful. You've stepped into something bigger than one traffic stop." The call ended, and Jimmy looked up to find Cortez watching him intently. "They want you to step aside," she observed. "Yes? And what about you, Lieutenant? Will you step aside or step up?" Before she could answer, Jimmy's computer chimed with an incoming email. He glanced at the screen and froze. "What is it?" Cortez asked. "An email from Officer Reynolds," Jimmy said, his voice tight. Subject line, "You don't know who you're messing with." Cortez stood immediately. "That's a direct threat to a federal judge." He's crossed from misconduct into criminal territory. Jimmy opened the email, reading aloud. Judge Patterson, you may think your robe protects you, but remember that my brothers in blue are everywhere. Your class action suit is going nowhere. Back off now, or next time it won't just be a traffic stop. Some accidents can't be caught on camera. The silence that followed was deafening. Cortez reached for her phone. I need to report this immediately. Wait, Jimmy said, an idea forming. This changes everything. Yes, it elevates the situation to witness intimidation and threatening a federal official. No, I mean, yes, it does that. But it also gives us leverage we didn't have before. Jimmy's eyes gleamed with the strategic thinking that had made him a formidable presence in the courtroom. Officer Reynolds just made a critical error. He threatened a federal judge in writing. Cortez agreed. He'll be fired, possibly prosecuted. More than that, Jimmy said. He's just provided concrete evidence of retaliatory intent that can be used in a class action suit. And he's implicated others, brothers in blue, suggesting a conspiracy. Jimmy stood, a new resolve evident in his bearing. Lieutenant Cortez, I believe we've reached a turning point. Officer Reynolds thought he was untouchable because of his badge. Instead, he may have just become the key to unlocking systemic change. Cortez took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing. I have documentation. Notes I've kept for years. Names, dates, incidents that were covered up. I was saving it for, I don't know what. Insurance, maybe. Or for a moment like this, Jimmy suggested. When they might actually make a difference. She nodded slowly. I'll testify. To whatever Internal Affairs asks, and in your class action if necessary. Jimmy extended his hand, which she shook firmly. This won't be easy for either of us. No, she agreed. But maybe it's necessary. As Cortez left his chambers, Jimmy returned to his desk and began typing a response to Chief Judge Hargrove. He would not recuse himself from the Henderson case. Instead, he would disclose his personal experience on the record and let the defendants challenge his impartiality if they dared, knowing that any such challenge would only bring more attention to the very practices they sought to hide. His phone buzzed with a text message from his wife. Just saw the news. Are you okay? Jimmy replied simply, better than okay. This might be the most important case of my career. He turned to the window, gazing out at the city's skyline as the afternoon sun bathed the buildings in golden light. Officer Stephen Reynolds had intended to humiliate him, to put him in his place. Instead, he had inadvertently given Jimmy the platform and the motivation to pursue justice with renewed vigor. The wheels were now in motion. Reynolds had no idea what he had started, or how it would end for him and the system that had protected officers like him for far too long. In the game of chess that had begun at that traffic stop, Jimmy Patterson had just declared check. 6 weeks after the fateful traffic stop, Officer Stephen Reynolds sat alone in the police department's locker room, staring at his empty locker. The word suspended was emblazoned across a notice taped to the metal door. His once pristine uniform hung limply on a hanger, the badge he'd been so proud of now missing from its place over his heart. The department investigation had been swift and thorough. Reynolds' threatening email to Judge Patterson had been the final nail in his coffin, a direct violation of federal law. Criminal charges were pending, with the FBI now involved in the case. 30 minutes to clear out your things, Reynolds, Captain Bennett said from the doorway, his voice flat and unsympathetic. Your union rep is waiting outside. Stephen nodded numbly, stuffing personal items into a cardboard box. His mind flashed back to his brother Thomas, now serving year 2 of an 8-year sentence. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. He might soon be joining his brother behind bars. Across town, Judge Jimmy Patterson adjusted his robes as he prepared to enter the courtroom. Today was the final hearing in the Henderson class action suit against the Metro Police Department. The gallery was packed with journalists, civil rights advocates, and concerned citizens. All rise for the Honorable Judge James Patterson, the bailiff announced. Jimmy entered and took his seat at the bench, surveying the crowded room with practiced calm. The past 6 weeks had transformed him from simply a judge into a reluctant symbol of the very injustice he was now tasked with addressing. You may be seated, he said, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. Before we proceed with closing arguments, I'd like to address several motions filed since our last session. Jimmy shuffled through documents, pausing at a particular page. The defendant's motion to have me recuse myself due to personal bias is denied. He looked directly at the police department's legal team. My personal experience with Officer Reynolds, while unfortunate, does not constitute a conflict of interest, but rather provides contextual understanding of the issues at hand. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Furthermore, Jimmy continued, this court has reviewed the extensive evidence presented, including statistical analysis of traffic stops over the past 5 years, testimony from Lieutenant Diana Cortez and 6 other officers, and the comprehensive review conducted by the Independent Oversight Committee. What Jimmy didn't mention was the personal cost of this case. Lieutenant Cortez had taken early retirement after facing harassment from fellow officers. His own family had received anonymous threats, necessitating additional security at their home. But change never came without sacrifice. 3 hours later, after hearing final arguments from both sides, Jimmy delivered his ruling. This court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, he declared, his voice steady and resolute. The evidence clearly demonstrates a pattern of discriminatory practices within the Metro Police Department that violates the constitutional rights of citizens based on race and socioeconomic factors. He detailed the court-mandated reforms, comprehensive retraining of all officers, implementation of an independent civilian review board with real authority, mandatory body cameras with strict activation protocols, and financial restitution to victims of proven discriminatory stops. This court will retain jurisdiction to ensure compliance with these orders, Jimmy concluded. We are adjourned. As he rose to leave the bench, Jimmy caught sight of a familiar face in the back of the courtroom, Stephen Reynolds, in civilian clothes, watching with an unreadable expression. 2 days later, Jimmy sat in his chambers reviewing case files when Darlene announced an unexpected visitor. Stephen Reynolds is here to see you, Judge. Security has cleared him. Jimmy hesitated, then nodded. Send him in. Reynolds entered, a shadow of his former self. Gone was the arrogant posture and contemptuous gaze. In their place was a man humbled by consequences, dark circles under his eyes. Judge Patterson, he began awkwardly. I don't know if I should be here, but I needed to speak with you. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds, Jimmy said, gesturing to a chair. I understand you've been officially terminated from the force. Yes, sir. And I'm facing criminal charges for the email I sent you. Reynolds' voice cracked slightly. My hearing is next week. Jimmy studied him carefully. Why are you here? Reynolds took a deep breath. I'm here because I have a choice to make. My lawyer says if I plead guilty to a lesser charge of harassment, I might avoid prison time. But I'd have to agree to testify against other officers in the department about discriminatory practices I witnessed. And you're asking for my advice? Jimmy raised an eyebrow. No, sir. I'm telling you, I'm going to do it. Reynolds met his gaze directly for the first time. What I did to you was wrong. What I've done to countless others was wrong. My brother made bad choices and paid the price. I blamed you for his sentence instead of holding him accountable for his actions. Jimmy leaned back, surprised by the man's candor. The community service program, Reynolds continued. The one being created as part of your ruling. If I cooperate fully, is there any chance I could qualify? To try to make amends. The irony was perfect. Reynolds now needed Jimmy's approval for the very program that might be his only path to redemption. That would depend on your sincerity, Mr. Reynolds, Jimmy replied carefully. Actions speak louder than words. 6 months later, Jimmy drove through Oak Ridge Heights in his Mercedes, the same route where he'd been stopped by Reynolds. He pulled into the parking lot of the community center, where the new Police Community Reconciliation Program was holding its monthly forum. Inside, he found Stephen Reynolds leading a discussion with a group of officers and community members. Reynolds had indeed testified against fellow officers, revealing a culture of discrimination that had led to multiple indictments. His cooperation had earned him probation instead of prison time, and a chance to participate in the reconciliation program. Judge Patterson, Reynolds acknowledged him as the meeting concluded. I didn't expect to see you here. I like to check in occasionally, Jimmy replied. How are things progressing? Slowly. Some officers still won't speak to me. They call me a traitor. Reynolds shrugged. But others are listening. That's a start. Jimmy nodded. Change is never easy, Mr. Reynolds. As they walked to the parking lot, Reynolds paused beside Jimmy's Mercedes. I never properly apologized for that day. I'm sorry, Judge Patterson. Not just for the stop, but for who I was. Jimmy studied the man who had once threatened him, now humbled by justice but perhaps strengthened by accountability. The measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, Mr. Reynolds, Jimmy said finally. It's in how they respond when those mistakes are revealed. He extended his hand, which Reynolds shook with visible emotion. As Jimmy drove away, he caught sight of Reynolds in his rearview mirror, a man facing the long road of redemption. The system wasn't fixed, not by a long shot. But perhaps, in this small corner of justice, the scales had finally balanced. Sometimes karma worked in unexpected ways. Reynolds had stopped Jimmy on the road that day, intending humiliation and intimidation. Instead, he had set in motion events that would change not only his own life but potentially thousands of others. And for Judge Jimmy Patterson, that was justice enough.